The dusty telegram trembled in Theresa Wilson's hands as she stood on the platform of the Kansas City railway station. Her three younger sisters gathered close beside her like chicks around a hen, and she knew with absolute certainty that their lives had just changed forever. "What does it say?" asked Millicent, the second oldest at 21, her green eyes wide with concern as she watched Theresa's face drain of color. Theresa swallowed hard, reading the words again though they were already burned into her memory. "It is from Marshal Henderson in Ardmore, Indian Territory. He says Thomas has gone missing. Last seen heading into the Cherokee Nation 2 weeks ago, tracking a horse thief. No word since." The youngest, 16-year-old Sarah, let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Between them stood 19-year-old Catherine, whose jaw set with the same stubborn determination that had always marked the Wilson family. "Then we go find him," Catherine said flatly, as though it were the simplest thing in the world. "Catherine, we cannot just traipse into Indian Territory," Millicent protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "We are 4 women alone. We have no experience with such wilderness, and Thomas is a deputy marshal. If he is in trouble, what could we possibly do?" "He is our brother," Theresa said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of authority that came from being the eldest at 23. "Mother and father are gone. We are all the family Thomas has, and he is all we have. I will not abandon him to whatever fate has befallen him." She looked at each of her sisters in turn, seeing her own fear reflected back at her, but also seeing something else: resolve. The Wilson girls had never been the type to sit idle and wait for men to solve their problems. Their mother had raised them with backbones of steel, even if society expected them to be delicate flowers. "We leave on the afternoon train," Theresa decided. "Pack light. Practical clothing only. We may be gone for some time." The journey south to Ardmore took 2 days of rattling railway cars, uncomfortable seats, and restless sleep. Theresa spent the hours staring out the window, watching the landscape transform from the rolling plains of Kansas to the rougher, wilder territory of what would someday be Oklahoma. The land here was different, untamed in a way that made her heart race with equal parts excitement and terror. Thomas had always been the adventurous one, joining the marshals at just 18, trading the relative safety of their childhood home in Missouri for a life of danger and purpose. Their parents had died of fever within days of each other 3 years ago, leaving Theresa to care for her sisters while Thomas sent money when he could. Now he needed them, and she would move heaven and earth to find him. Ardmore proved to be a rough frontier town, all wooden buildings and dusty streets, filled with cowboys, farmers, merchants, and the occasional group of tribal members coming to trade. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the 4 sisters stepped off the train, their modest traveling cases in hand, drawing stares from every direction. "Well," Millicent muttered, "we certainly seem to be attracting attention." "Ignore them," Theresa said firmly, though she felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon them. 4 young women traveling alone was unusual enough. 4 young women who clearly had no idea where they were going was apparently worth gawking at. "Pardon me," a deep voice said from behind them, and Theresa turned to find herself looking up at one of the tallest men she had ever seen. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor and a face that was handsome in a rough, weathered way. His hat was pulled low against the sun, but she could see kind brown eyes studying them with concern. He wore the typical garb of a cowboy, leather chaps over worn denims, a faded blue shirt, and a bandana around his neck. A gun belt sat low on his hips, but his hands were nowhere near the pistol. "You ladies look a bit lost," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as a man of the South. "This is not exactly the friendliest town for women alone. Might I be of some assistance?" Theresa straightened her shoulders, determined not to appear as helpless as she felt. "We are looking for the marshal's office. We have business with Marshal Henderson." The cowboy's expression shifted to one of surprise, then concern. "The marshal's office is 3 buildings down on the left, but might I ask what business 4 young ladies have with the law?" "If you are in some kind of trouble, perhaps I could help." "We are not in trouble," Theresa said, softening her tone slightly. The man seemed genuinely concerned, not condescending. "We are looking for our brother. He is a deputy marshal who has gone missing." Recognition flashed across the cowboy's face. "You would not happen to be kin to Thomas Wilson, would you?" All 4 sisters spoke at once, a jumble of questions and demands until the cowboy held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Hold on now, one at a time. My name is Vincent Sawyer. I run cattle in these parts, and I know your brother. Good man, Thomas. We have shared a drink or 2 at the saloon. I heard he went missing, and half the territory has been talking about it." "What have you heard?" Theresa demanded, stepping closer. "Do you know where he might be?" Vincent shook his head slowly. "Nothing certain, I am afraid, but there are rumors. Some say he was tracking Jake Morrow's gang, horse thieves who have been plaguing the territory for months. Others say he followed a lead into the Cherokee Nation and never came back out. The marshal has been organizing search parties, but this is vast country, and tracking one man is like finding a needle in a haystack." Sarah began to cry softly, and Catherine put an arm around her shoulders. Millicent looked as though she might faint, and Theresa felt her own composure beginning to crack. They had come so far, hoping for answers, only to find more questions. "Come on," Vincent said gently. "Let me help you get settled somewhere. There is a boarding house run by a respectable widow named Mrs. Patterson. You can stay there while you talk to the marshal and figure out your next steps. You should not be standing in the street like this." Theresa wanted to protest, to insist they could manage on their own, but the truth was they needed help. She nodded, gathering her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. That is very kind of you." "Vincent, please," he said with a small smile, "and it is no trouble at all. Any friend of Thomas Wilson deserves a helping hand." He gathered up 2 of their cases as though they weighed nothing and began leading them down the dusty main street. Theresa found herself walking beside him while her sisters followed close behind, still drawing stares, but now under the protection of a man who clearly commanded some respect in this town. Other men tipped their hats to Vincent, and he returned the gestures with easy familiarity. "Have you lived in Ardmore long?" Theresa asked, partly to fill the silence and partly because she found herself genuinely curious about this man who had appeared at exactly the right moment. "About 5 years now," Vincent replied. "Came down from Texas after the war, looking for a fresh start. Bought some land, built up a small herd. It is not much, but it is mine, and that means something." "The war," Theresa repeated softly. "You fought Confederate cavalry," he said, and she heard a note of old pain in his voice. "I was just 18 when it ended. Lost most of my family to it, one way or another. Figured Indian Territory was far enough away to leave those ghosts behind." Theresa understood that sentiment all too well. Grief and loss were universal languages, and she heard both in his words. "I am sorry for your losses." "And I for yours," he said, glancing at her. "Thomas mentioned once that you had lost your parents, said his older sister was raising the younger girls all on her own. That takes strength." The fact that Thomas had spoken of her to this stranger made something warm bloom in Theresa's chest. Her brother had always been proud of his family, but knowing he talked about them even out here in this wild place touched her deeply. Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was a neat two-story building with a wide porch and curtains in the windows. The widow herself was a plump, motherly woman in her 50s who clucked over the sisters like they were lost chicks and immediately set about preparing rooms for them. "You poor dears," she said, bustling about with fresh linens. "Coming all this way to find your brother. Of course you shall stay as long as you need. The marshal is a good man. If anyone can help you, it is him." Vincent lingered in the parlor as Mrs. Patterson showed the sisters to their rooms. When Theresa came back downstairs, having left her sisters to wash up and rest from the journey, she found him standing by the window, staring out at the street with a thoughtful expression. "I have been thinking," he said without preamble when he heard her approach, "about your brother and where he might have gone. I know this territory better than most. I have ridden from one end to the other, trading cattle, tracking strays, dealing with rustlers. If you want to find Thomas, you need someone who knows the land. The marshal is a good man, but he has a whole territory to worry about. Your brother is just one missing deputy to him." "But he is everything to us," Theresa said quietly. Vincent turned to face her, and she saw determination in his eyes that matched her own. "I would like to help you search for him. I can spare a few weeks from the ranch. My foreman is capable, and the cattle are not going anywhere. Thomas was kind to me when I first came to Ardmore, helped me navigate the legal side of buying land. I owe him a debt." Theresa felt hope surge in her chest, but also caution. "Why would you do this? You barely know us. We have no way to pay you for your time." "I am not asking for payment," Vincent said firmly. "I am offering help because it is the right thing to do. Your brother is a good man, and you have come all this way to find him. That speaks to the kind of family he has. Let me do this." She studied his face, looking for any sign of ulterior motive, but found only sincerity. There was something solid about Vincent Sawyer, something trustworthy that she recognized on an instinctive level. Perhaps it was foolish to trust a stranger, but what choice did she have? "Then I accept your offer," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you, Vincent." His hand was warm and calloused when it closed around hers, and the handshake lasted just a moment longer than was strictly proper. When their eyes met, Theresa felt something pass between them, a spark of recognition that had nothing to do with their current circumstances and everything to do with two souls acknowledging each other. Vincent cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. "I will talk to the marshal, see what information he has, and then start making preparations for a search party. We should plan to leave in 2 days. That will give your sisters time to rest and give me time to gather supplies." "We are coming with you," Theresa said immediately. "I beg your pardon, my sisters and I. We are coming on the search. Thomas is our brother. We will not sit idle in a boarding house while others look for him." Vincent looked as though he wanted to argue, and Theresa braced herself for the inevitable protest that the wilderness was no place for women, that they would be a burden, that they should stay where it was safe. Instead, he surprised her. "Can you ride?" "Well enough," Theresa said, though in truth her experience with horses was limited to the gentle mare they had kept at their home in Missouri. "We are quick learners." "It will be rough country," Vincent warned. "We may be sleeping on the ground, eating trail food, facing danger. If we find Jake Morrow's gang, there could be violence, and that is not even considering the possibility of hostile encounters with tribal members who do not take kindly to strangers on their land." "I understand the risks," Theresa said. "But I also understand that I will go mad sitting here doing nothing while my brother is out there somewhere, possibly hurt, possibly dying. I need to do this, Vincent. We need to do this." He studied her for a long moment, and she met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away or back down. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but we do this my way. You follow my lead, you listen to what I say, and if I tell you to do something, you do it immediately without question. Out there, hesitation can get you killed. Can you agree to that?" "Yes," Theresa said without hesitation. "Then we leave in 2 days. Meet me at the livery stable at dawn. Bring only what you can carry in a saddle bag, practical clothing, nothing fancy, and Miss Wilson." "Yes, call me Vincent. If we are going to be traveling together, we should dispense with formalities." "Then you should call me Theresa," she replied, allowing herself a small smile. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of activity. Vincent proved to be a man of his word, organizing everything with military precision. He purchased 4 gentle horses for the sisters, refusing to let them pay despite Theresa's protests. He also assembled supplies, weapons, maps, and provisions for what might be a long journey. The marshal, a grizzled man named Henderson who had seen too many hard years, provided what information he could. Thomas had been tracking Jake Morrow, a notorious horse thief, into the Cherokee Nation. His last known location was near the Canadian River, but that had been 2 weeks ago. The trail was cold, and the chances of finding him alive grew slimmer with each passing day. "I will not lie to you, Miss Wilson," the marshal said bluntly when Theresa met with him. "The odds are not in your favor. Your brother was a good deputy, one of the best, but this country eats men alive. If Morrow's gang got hold of him, they would not have shown mercy. And if something else happened, a fall from his horse, a rattlesnake, getting lost in the wilderness, well, 2 weeks is a long time to survive out there alone." "Then we will look for his body if we must," Theresa said, her voice steady despite the pain those words caused. "But we will not leave him out there." Henderson nodded with respect. "Vincent Sawyer is a good man to have at your back. If anyone can find your brother, it is him. He knows this land better than most, and he is handy with a gun if it comes to that. You could do worse for a guide." Theresa was beginning to realize just how fortunate they had been to encounter Vincent. In a town full of rough men and uncertain allies, he had proven himself trustworthy and capable. More than that, she found herself drawn to him in ways that had nothing to do with their search for Thomas. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the efficient way he moved, the quiet competence with which he handled every task. When he smiled, which was not often but enough to notice, it transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. And when he spoke to her, he treated her as an equal, never condescending or dismissive of her opinions. On the evening before their departure, Theresa found Vincent at the livery stable, checking over the horses one final time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the air had finally cooled from the oppressive heat of the day. "Are you having second thoughts?" he asked when he noticed her approach. "No," she said honestly. "Are you?" He smiled at that. "Maybe a few. I have led cattle drives and tracked rustlers, but I have never been responsible for 4 young women in the wilderness before. It is a sobering responsibility." "We are not asking you to be responsible for us," Theresa said, leaning against the fence rail beside him. "We are asking you to guide us." "There is a difference." "Is there?" Vincent turned to face her fully. "Because out there, if something goes wrong, I will feel responsible whether you asked for it or not. That is just who I am." Theresa felt something shift in her chest, a tightening that was both pleasant and terrifying. "Then I suppose we will have to make sure nothing goes wrong." "I wish it were that simple," Vincent said softly. "Theresa, I need you to understand something. If we find your brother and he is alive, that is the best outcome we can hope for. But if we find him and he is not, or if we find nothing at all, you need to be prepared for that. This search may not have the ending you want." "I know," she whispered, "but I have to try. I have to know one way or another. The not knowing is worse than any truth could be. Vincent reached out and gently touched her shoulder, the gesture brief but comforting. Then we will find the truth together. I promise you that much. Dawn came too quickly and too slowly all at once. Theresa woke before first light, too anxious to sleep, and found her sisters already stirring. They dressed in the practical clothing Vincent had suggested, split skirts that would allow them to ride astride, sturdy boots, and simple blouses. Sarah looked frightened but determined. Catherine wore her usual stubborn expression, and Millicent appeared calm on the surface, though Theresa could see the worry in her eyes. Vincent was waiting at the livery with the horses already saddled and the pack animals loaded. He had brought along a young man he introduced as his ranch hand, Pete, who would accompany them to help manage the supplies and provide an extra gun if needed. "Ready?" Vincent asked, and Theresa nodded. The first day of riding was harder than any of them had anticipated. Despite Theresa's claim that they could ride well enough, the reality of hours in the saddle on rough terrain was brutal. By the time they made camp that first evening, every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Vincent, to his credit, did not comment on their obvious discomfort. He simply helped them dismount, showed them how to tend to their horses, and set up camp with Pete's assistance. Dinner was simple beans and hardtack, but Theresa had never been more grateful for a meal. "It will get easier," Vincent said quietly as he sat beside her near the fire. "Your body will adjust to the riding. Give it a few days." "And if we do not have a few days?" Theresa asked. "What if we need to move faster to find Thomas?" "We move at the pace we can sustain," Vincent said firmly. "Pushing too hard will only result in injuries, and then we will not be able to help anyone. Trust me, Theresa. I know what I am doing." She wanted to argue, but she was too tired. Instead, she simply nodded and accepted the blanket he offered her. The ground was hard beneath her bedroll, the night sounds of the wilderness unfamiliar and slightly frightening, but somehow she managed to fall asleep. The days began to blur together as they traveled deeper into the territory. Vincent led them along the route Thomas had most likely taken, following the Canadian River and asking questions at every settlement and trading post they encountered. Some people remembered seeing a deputy marshal pass through. Others had no information to offer. On the fourth day, they got their first real lead. An old trader at a small outpost remembered Thomas stopping to water his horse. He had been asking about Jake Morrow and had headed northeast toward the Cherokee settlements. "He looked determined," the trader recalled. "Told me he was close to catching Morrow, that he had a good lead. I warned him to be careful, that Morrow was a mean one, but he just smiled and said he could handle it." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes at this glimpse of her brother, so alive and confident just 2 weeks ago. Vincent thanked the trader and bought some additional supplies before they continued on. That night, as they sat around the campfire, Vincent began to tell them about the territory, about the tribes who lived here and the complex politics of the land. He spoke of the injustices he had witnessed, the way the government had forced people from their homes and crammed them into this territory, how the promised protections and payments often failed to materialize. "Your brother understood that," Vincent said. "He tried to be fair in his dealings, to treat everyone with respect regardless of whether they were white, tribal, or anything else. That made him rare among lawmen out here. Most only care about enforcing the law as it benefits their own people." "Thomas always had a strong sense of justice," Theresa said. "Even as a boy, he could not stand to see anyone treated unfairly. It is what made him want to be a marshal in the first place." "It is a good quality," Vincent said, "though sometimes dangerous in a place like this, where justice is not always clear-cut." As they talked, Theresa became increasingly aware of how much she had come to depend on Vincent's presence. He made her feel safe in this wild place, not because he treated her as fragile, but because he treated her as capable. He taught her how to read the land, how to spot signs of other travelers, how to build a proper fire. He never patronized or condescended, simply shared his knowledge as though it were the most natural thing in the world. And she found herself watching him more and more, noticing the way the firelight played across his features, the gentle way he spoke to the horses, the patience with which he answered Sarah's endless questions. Her sisters had clearly adopted him as a kind of protective older brother figure, but Theresa's feelings were decidedly not sisterly. On the 6th day, they found Thomas's horse. The animal was grazing near a stream, saddle and bridle still in place, though the stirrups were twisted and the reins were tangled. Vincent approached slowly, speaking in a low, soothing voice, and the horse allowed him to take hold of its bridle. "This is definitely a marshal's horse," he said, examining the brand. "And look here, this is your brother's saddle. I recognize the tooling on the leather." Theresa dismounted on shaking legs and approached the horse, running her hand along its neck. This animal had carried her brother. It had been with him when something went wrong. She wanted to ask it what had happened, to demand answers it could not give. "No blood on the saddle," Vincent observed, and Theresa did not know whether to be relieved or more worried. Whatever happened, he was not shot while riding. "Pete, search the area. Look for any signs of a struggle or tracks. Theresa, check the saddle bags. See if anything is missing." Theresa's hands shook as she unbuckled the saddle bags. Inside, she found Thomas's spare ammunition, a tin of coffee, some jerky, and a small leather journal he used to record his cases. She pulled out the journal and flipped to the last entry, dated the day before he disappeared. "Following Morrow northeast along the river. Spotted his camp this morning. 3 men with him, all armed. Will wait until dark and approach on foot. If all goes well, should have them in custody by tomorrow. If not, told Henderson where to find my body." Theresa's vision blurred with tears, and she felt strong hands on her shoulders. Vincent pulled her gently against his chest, and she allowed herself a moment of weakness, breathing in his scent of leather and horses and the open plains. "He was trying to arrest them alone," she whispered. "Why would he do that? Why would he not wait for backup?" "Because he was a lawman and it was his job," Vincent said gently. "And because men like your brother believe they can handle anything. It is both their greatest strength and their greatest flaw." Pete returned with news. He had found tracks, lots of them, leading away from the stream toward a rocky outcropping about a mile north. There were signs of a scuffle, broken branches, disturbed earth, and what might have been blood on some rocks, though it was too old to be certain. They followed the tracks, moving carefully, with Vincent in the lead and Pete bringing up the rear. The sisters stayed close together, and Theresa could feel the tension radiating from all of them. They were close now, close to answers, and she did not know whether to hope or despair. The tracks led to a small canyon where the evidence of a struggle was unmistakable. Spent shell casings littered the ground, and there were clear signs that several men had fought here. Vincent examined everything with careful attention, piecing together the story the land told. "Your brother came here on foot," he said, pointing to boot prints that were different from the others. "He confronted them here, probably tried to arrest them. They fought back. I count 4 sets of tracks leaving the area heading east, but only 3 sets returning to where their horses were. That 4th set, those are different boots, heavier. That might be Thomas." "Might be," Catherine spoke up. "You mean you are not certain?" "I am certain that 4 men went one direction and only 3 came back," Vincent said patiently. What I cannot tell you from tracks alone is whether the fourth man was taken prisoner, escaped, or was killed and his body hidden somewhere. We need to follow this trail to its end." They pressed on, following the tracks east into rougher country. The landscape became increasingly difficult to navigate, all rocky hills and dense scrub. Twice they lost the trail and had to backtrack until Vincent could pick it up again. On the 8th day of their journey, they encountered their first real danger. They had stopped to water the horses at a small creek when Pete suddenly hissed a warning. Vincent immediately pulled Theresa behind him and motioned for the other sisters to take cover. 4 men emerged from the trees, all armed, all with the hard look of those who lived on the wrong side of the law. "Well, well," one of them drawled, a tall man with a scar across his cheek. "What have we got here? A cowboy playing nursemaid to 4 pretty ladies. That is quite the harem you have collected, friend." "We are not looking for trouble," Vincent said calmly, though Theresa noticed his hand had moved to rest on his gun. "Just passing through, heading to Fort Smith." "That is a lie," another man said. "We have been watching you for 2 days. You are following tracks, asking questions. You are looking for someone." Theresa felt her heart hammering in her chest. These could be the men who took Thomas. They could be Jake Morrow's gang, and they were outnumbered, outgunned, and far from any help. "We are looking for my brother," Theresa said, stepping out from behind Vincent despite his attempt to keep her back. "He is a deputy marshal who went missing. We just want to find him and go home." The scarred man laughed. "A marshal? Lady, you should not go around admitting you are kin to lawmen. That is not healthy in these parts." "Let them go, Morrow," Pete said suddenly, and Theresa realized he was speaking to the scarred man, Jake Morrow himself. "They are not worth the trouble." "I will decide what is worth the trouble," Morrow snarled. "And I think 4 women would fetch a nice price across the border. As for the men, well, we cannot leave witnesses, can we?" Everything happened very fast after that. Vincent drew his gun with shocking speed and the clearing erupted in gunfire. He pushed Theresa to the ground behind some rocks, shouting for her sisters to get down. Pete returned fire, and for several terrifying moments, the world was nothing but noise and smoke and fear. When the shooting stopped, Theresa cautiously raised her head. 2 of Morrow's men were down, one clearly dead and the other badly wounded. Morrow himself had taken cover behind a tree and the 4th man had disappeared entirely. "Come out, Morrow," Vincent called. "You are outgunned and outmaneuvered. Surrender now and we will take you to the marshal alive. Keep fighting and you will end up like your friends." "You think you have won," Morrow shouted back. "You think killing my boys matters. I have information you want, Cowboy, about that marshal who came snooping around. You want to know what happened to him? Then you better not shoot me." Theresa felt hope and fear war in her chest. Morrow knew something about Thomas. But could they trust anything he said? Vincent glanced back at her and she saw the question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. They needed to know. "Tell me where he is," Vincent called. "Tell me and I will let you walk away." Morrow laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that? The moment I talk, you will put a bullet in me." "I give you my word," Vincent said. "Tell me where the marshal is and you can ride out of here. I am more interested in finding him than in bringing you to justice." There was a long pause, and then Morrow spoke again. "We did not kill him, if that is what you are wondering. Took him prisoner after he tried to arrest us. Thought we might ransom him or use him as a bargaining chip if the law came after us. Kept him at our camp for 3 days, but he escaped. Slippery devil, that one. We tracked him for a while, but he disappeared into the hills. Could be dead by now or could have made it to one of the Cherokee settlements. That was 5 days ago." "Where?" Vincent demanded. "Where exactly did you last see him?" "North of here, maybe 10 miles. There is a box canyon with a spring. That is where our camp was. He headed northeast when he ran. Now let me go like you promised. Vincent looked at Theresa, and she could see he was leaving the decision to her. She thought about all the pain this man had caused, all the horses he had stolen, the lives he had ruined. But she also thought about Thomas, possibly alive, possibly waiting for rescue. Let him go, she said quietly. Vincent nodded and called out to Morrow. Leave your weapons and your horse. You can walk out of here. If I see you again, our deal is void. Slowly, Morrow emerged from behind the tree. He laid down his gun belt and began walking backward, never taking his eyes off Vincent. When he reached the edge of the clearing, he turned and ran. Pete started to raise his rifle, but Vincent put a hand on his arm. Let him go. We have bigger concerns. They buried Morrow's dead man and left the wounded one with water and bandages, though Vincent suspected he would not last the night. It was rough justice, but it was all they could manage out here. Then they pushed north with renewed urgency. If Thomas had escaped 5 days ago, he might still be alive, but he would be in bad shape, possibly injured, certainly exhausted and desperate. They found the box canyon exactly where Morrow had described it. The remains of a camp were still visible, and Vincent found evidence that someone had been kept tied near the spring. There were marks on a tree where ropes had rubbed and blood on the ground. He was hurt, Vincent said grimly. Before or after he escaped, I cannot say. But there is blood here, and more over there by those rocks where it looks like he climbed out of the canyon. They followed the trail northeast, moving as quickly as they dared. Theresa felt hope building in her chest despite her best efforts to contain it. Thomas had been alive 5 days ago. He had escaped. He was out here somewhere, and they were going to find him. On the 10th day of their journey, they arrived at a small Cherokee settlement. The people there were initially wary of the strangers, but when Vincent explained their purpose in the halting Cherokee he had picked up over the years, an old woman stepped forward. We found a white man 8 days ago, she said in English. He was half dead, fevered and wounded. We have been caring for him, but he has been unconscious more than awake. He carries a marshal's badge. Theresa felt her knees go weak with relief. Where is he? Can we see him? The old woman led them to a small cabin where Thomas lay on a pallet, his face pale and his breathing shallow. He had been shot in the side, and though the Cherokee healers had done their best to clean and bind the wound, infection had clearly set in. Theresa rushed to his side, taking his hot hand in hers. Thomas, Thomas, can you hear me? It is Theresa. We have come to take you home. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Theresa, that cannot be. You are in Missouri. This is the fever talking. No fever, you stubborn man, she said, tears streaming down her face. We came to find you, all 4 of us, and Vincent Sawyer helped us track you down. You are safe now. Thomas's gaze shifted to Vincent and a weak smile crossed his lips. Sawyer, should have known. You always were too stubborn to mind your own business. Look who is talking, Vincent said, moving to the other side of the pallet. You tried to arrest 4 men single-handed. That is either very brave or very stupid. Probably both, Thomas admitted before his eyes closed again. The Cherokee healers worked with Vincent to fashion a travois that could be pulled behind a horse, creating a more comfortable way to transport Thomas than having him try to ride. The old woman gave them herbs and instructions for treating his wound, and the settlement provided additional supplies for their journey back to Ardmore. The trip back was slower and more careful, with frequent stops to check on Thomas and change his bandages. Vincent proved to have surprising skill with medical care, likely learned from years of tending injured cattle and cowboys on the range. Between him and Theresa, they managed to keep the infection from worsening, though Thomas remained weak and feverish. Millicent and Catherine took turns riding beside the travois, talking to their brother even when he could not respond, while Sarah helped Pete manage the pack animals. Theresa found herself riding near Vincent more often than not, and they fell into easy conversation during the long days of travel. "You were remarkable back there," Vincent said one evening as they made camp. "When Morrow had us surrounded, you did not panic. You stepped forward and spoke to him directly. That took courage." "I was terrified," Theresa admitted, "but I was also angry. Angry that he had hurt Thomas, angry that he thought he could threaten us. Sometimes anger is stronger than fear." Vincent smiled at that. "Thomas told me once that his older sister was the toughest person he knew. I am beginning to understand what he meant." He said that. Theresa felt warmth spread through her chest. "He did. He also said that you gave up your own dreams of becoming a teacher to raise your sisters after your parents died, that you never complained, never asked for help, just did what needed to be done." "Someone had to," Theresa said softly. "And they are my sisters. I love them." "Love is one thing," Vincent said. "Sacrifice is another. You sacrificed for them, and now they sacrificed for you, coming all this way to help find Thomas. That is a family worth having." They fell silent, both staring into the fire. After a moment, Vincent spoke again, his voice lower and more hesitant. "I have been thinking about what happens when we get back to Ardmore. Thomas will need time to recover, which means you and your sisters will need to stay for a while. I would like to help with that, if you will let me. I have some money saved and my ranch is doing well enough. I could pay for your rooms at the boarding house, make sure you have everything you need." "That is very generous," Theresa said carefully. "But we cannot accept charity, Vincent. We will find a way to manage." "It is not charity," he said quickly. "It is just me helping friends. Thomas is my friend, and you and your sisters have become important to me during this journey. I want to help. Please let me." Theresa studied his face in the firelight, seeing sincerity there but also something else. Something that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch in her throat. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are we important to you?" Vincent was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. "When I left Texas after the war, I thought I was done with caring about people. I had lost too much, hurt too badly. I figured I would live my life alone, build my ranch, and that would be enough. And for 5 years it was. But then I met Thomas, and he reminded me what it was like to have a friend. And then I met you, and you reminded me what it was like to feel something more than just existing." Theresa's breath caught. "Vincent, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know this is not the time or place for such talk. Your brother is injured, you are far from home, and you have had enough to worry about without me adding to it. I just wanted you to know that these past days with you have meant something to me. You mean something to me." Before she could respond, Sarah called out that Thomas was awake and asking for water. The moment passed, but Theresa carried Vincent's words with her like a precious secret, turning them over in her mind during the remaining days of travel. They arrived back in Ardmore 2 days later to find the entire town buzzing with news of their return. Marshal Henderson met them at the edge of town, relief visible on his weathered face when he saw Thomas alive. "I will be damned," he said, shaking his head. "I did not think you would find him, let alone bring him back breathing. Vincent Sawyer, you are a miracle worker." "It was not just me," Vincent said firmly. "His sisters never gave up. They pushed on when I would have turned back. They are the reason Thomas is alive." The doctor was summoned, and Thomas was carried to a room Mrs. Patterson hastily prepared. The bullet had done damage, the doctor confirmed, but the Cherokee healers had probably saved his life with their quick treatment. With rest and proper care, Thomas would recover fully, though it would take time. The relief that flooded through Theresa was so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. They had done it. Against all odds, they had found Thomas and brought him home. Her brother would live. That night, exhausted but too keyed up to sleep, Theresa sat on the porch of the boarding house and watched the stars. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Vincent approaching, his hat in his hands. "Thought I might find you here," he said. "Mind if I sit?" She patted the space beside her on the bench, and he settled down with a weary sigh. For a while, they simply sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the town settling down for the night. "What will you do now?" Vincent asked finally. "Will you take Thomas back to Missouri once he is well enough to travel?" Theresa had been thinking about that very question. "I do not know. Missouri holds our past, but there is not much left for us there. The house is sold, the friends we had have moved on. Perhaps it is time for a new beginning." "You could stay here," Vincent said carefully. "Ardmore is growing, they need teachers. You could open a school, pursue that dream Thomas mentioned. Your sisters could build lives here." "And what about you?" Theresa asked, turning to face him. "What do you want, Vincent?" He met her eyes, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, she could see everything he felt written plainly on his face. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "I want the chance to court you properly, to see if what I feel, and what I hope you might feel, could become something real and lasting. I want to wake up knowing you are near, go to sleep thinking about your smile. I want to build a life that has room for more than just cattle and endless prairie." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. "I think I started falling for you when you first appeared at the train station," she admitted. "This stranger who offered help without asking anything in return, and with every day of our journey I fell a little more. You are kind and brave and honest, and you treated me like I had a brain in my head. Do you know how rare that is?" "You are the strongest woman I have ever met," Vincent said, reaching for her hand. "Smart and determined and compassionate. When I look at you, I see my future if you will have me. Not now, not rushed, but someday when you are ready. I want to marry you, Theresa Wilson. I want to spend my life making you happy." "That is a bold proposal from a man who has known me less than 2 weeks," Theresa said, but she was smiling. "I have known you long enough to be certain," Vincent said. "But I am willing to wait as long as you need. Court you properly. Let you see what kind of man I am when we are not tracking outlaws and searching for missing brothers. Give you time to be sure of your own heart." "I am already sure," Theresa said softly. "But you are right that we should take our time. Thomas will need months to recover. We can use that time to know each other better, to be certain this is not just the intensity of our journey making us feel things that will not last." "Fair enough," Vincent agreed. "But know this, Theresa Wilson. I am not going anywhere. I will be here every day if you will let me, proving to you that what I feel is real." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, the gesture so tender it made her heart ache. Then he stood, settled his hat back on his head, and bid her good night. Over the following weeks, Theresa discovered that Vincent was indeed a man of his word. He visited every day, sometimes bringing flowers, sometimes bringing books, sometimes just bringing himself and his quiet, steady presence. He sat with Thomas, playing cards and talking about ranching and the territory. He charmed her sisters, treating each of them with respect and kindness. And he courted Theresa with old-fashioned propriety, always chaperoned, always respectful, but with an underlying intensity that made every stolen glance feel like a promise. Thomas recovered slowly but surely, gaining strength each day. When he was finally well enough to sit up and take proper notice of what was happening around him, he immediately fixated on the obvious connection between his sister and his friend. "Vincent Sawyer," he said one afternoon when the two men were alone, "are your intentions toward my sister honorable?" Vincent did not hesitate. Completely. I intend to marry her if she will have me. Thomas studied him for a long moment. She deserves the best kind of man, the kind who will treat her as an equal, who will support her dreams, who will never make her feel small or less than. Can you be that man? I can try every day of my life, Vincent said seriously. Your sister is extraordinary, Thomas. I know that. I would spend my life trying to be worthy of her. Good answer, Thomas said with a slight smile. You have my blessing for what it is worth. But you should know if you hurt her. I am a lawman with a gun and knowledge of many remote locations where a body would never be found. Vincent laughed. Julie noted. As autumn turned toward winter, Theresa made her decision. She would stay in Ardmore. With the money from selling their home in Missouri and some additional funds Vincent insisted on investing as a business partner, she opened a small school. It started with just a handful of students, children of ranchers and townspeople hungry for education, but it grew quickly. Millicent found work at the general store, her head for numbers making her invaluable to the owner. Catherine began working with the doctor, discovering a talent for healing that surprised everyone, including herself. And young Sarah, still just 16, enrolled in Theresa's school to complete her own education while helping with the younger children. Thomas, once recovered, returned to his duties as a deputy marshal, though with a new caution born of his brush with death. He still pursued justice with determination, but he no longer took unnecessary risks, and he made certain to always have backup. 6 months after their arrival in Ardmore, on a warm spring evening with wildflowers blooming across the prairie, Vincent took Theresa on a ride to his ranch. It was the first time she had seen it, and she was impressed by the neat buildings, the healthy cattle, and the obvious care with which Vincent managed his land. It is not much, he said, sounding almost apologetic, but it is mine and it is doing well. I could expand the house, add rooms for a family. There is good grazing land and water rights. A man could build a good life here. A woman too, Theresa said with a smile. A woman could build a good life here. Vincent turned to her, his eyes searching her face. Is that something you might want? To build a life here with me? In answer, Theresa stepped forward and kissed him. It was their first real kiss, months of careful courtship finally culminating in this moment of connection. His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt like she had finally come home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent laughed with pure joy. I am going to take that as a yes, he said. That is definitely a yes, Theresa confirmed. Yes, I will marry you, Vincent Sawyer. Yes, I will build a life with you. Yes to all of it. He kissed her again, gentler this time, filled with tenderness and promise. And there, on the land that would become their home, with the sun setting over the prairie and the future stretching bright before them, Theresa felt a happiness so complete it took her breath away. They were married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at the newly built church in Ardmore. Thomas walked Theresa down the aisle, his recovery now complete, and gave her away with tears in his eyes. All 3 of her sisters stood as witnesses, along with Pete and Marshal Henderson and half the town. Mrs. Patterson wept openly, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever seen. The preacher who performed the ceremony was new to the territory, a young man full of idealism about bringing civilization to the frontier, and he spoke eloquently about love and commitment and building a life together. But Theresa barely heard the words. She was too focused on Vincent, on the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, on the slight tremor in his hands as he slipped the ring onto her finger, on the fierce joy in his kiss when the preacher finally pronounced them man and wife. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and dancing and celebration that lasted well into the night. Theresa danced with her new husband, with her brother, with each of her sisters. She accepted congratulations from townspeople she had come to know and care about. And through it all, she felt Vincent's presence like an anchor, steadying her, supporting her, loving her. When they finally escaped to the ranch house that would now be their home, Vincent carried her over the threshold with surprising ease despite her protests that she was perfectly capable of walking. "I know you are," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room. "But I have been waiting months to do that, and I was not about to miss my chance." The house had been transformed in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Vincent had added 2 new rooms, expanded the kitchen, and brought in furniture that was simple but well made. Theresa recognized the touch of her sisters in the curtains on the windows and the quilts on the bed, gifts given with love. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Vincent held her close and spoke softly about their future. "I want you to keep teaching," he said. "I know some men would expect their wives to give up such work, but your school is important. Those children need you, and I can see how much joy it brings you." "Thank you," Theresa whispered, touched by his understanding. "And I want you to know that I am happy to be a rancher's wife, to help with the work here when I can. This is our life now together. We build it together." "Together," Vincent agreed, kissing her forehead. "I like the sound of that." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were rich with love and purpose. The school grew, eventually requiring Theresa to hire Catherine as a second teacher when the number of students became too much for one person to handle. Vincent's ranch prospered, and he took on more land, more cattle, becoming one of the more successful ranchers in the territory. Millicent married a banker from Texas who came to Ardmore to open a new branch, and they built a house just outside town. Sarah, when she turned 18, shocked everyone by announcing her intention to study medicine, inspired by Catherine's work with the doctor. She left for medical school back east, but promised to return and practice in Ardmore when she finished. Thomas eventually married as well, a quiet widow with 2 young children who needed a father. He proved to be an excellent stepfather, and Theresa delighted in being an aunt to his instant family. 2 years after their wedding, Theresa gave birth to their first child, a son they named Samuel after Vincent's father. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's determination, and from his first breath, he owned their hearts completely. Vincent proved to be a devoted father, gentle and patient with the baby in ways that surprised those who only knew him as a tough cowboy. Theresa would often find him in the rocking chair late at night, Samuel cradled against his chest, talking softly about the ranch and the cattle and all the things they would do together someday. "You are going to spoil him," Theresa said one night, watching them with a soft smile. "That is my right as a father," Vincent replied without looking up from his son's face. "Besides, he is going to need to be tough to handle all the siblings I plan to give him." "Oh, is that so?" Theresa laughed. "And how many children have you decided we are having?" "As many as the good Lord blesses us with," Vincent said. "This house has plenty of room, and I always wanted a big family." Their second child, a daughter named Grace, arrived 18 months later. She had Theresa's blonde hair and Vincent's brown eyes, and a sunny disposition that made everyone who met her smile. Samuel was utterly devoted to his baby sister, following her around as soon as she could crawl and appointing himself her protector. Theresa found that motherhood suited her, though it was challenging to balance with her work at the school. Vincent hired help at the ranch so he could be home more, and between the 2 of them and the willing assistance of Theresa's sisters, they managed to create a life that felt full but not overwhelming. 5 years after Grace came Benjamin, named for Theresa's father. He was a quiet, thoughtful child who loved books and learning, and Theresa knew even when he was small that he would be a scholar of some kind. 3 children, Vincent said one evening, watching them play in the yard. We are well on our way to that big family I wanted. 3 is plenty, Theresa replied, though she said it with a smile. But life had other plans, and 2 years later she found herself pregnant again. This time with twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Hope. The pregnancy was difficult and the birth even more so, and afterward the doctor told Theresa firmly that she should have no more children. 5 is a good number, Vincent said, holding the newborn twins while Theresa recovered. A perfect number. Our family is complete. And it was. 5 children who filled the house with noise and laughter and the occasional tears. 5 children who grew up knowing they were loved beyond measure, who learned from their mother's example that women could be strong and independent, and from their fathers that men could be gentle and supportive. Samuel grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the ranch and announced at 15 that he intended to expand it when he was old enough. Grace became a teacher like her mother, taking over the school when Theresa finally decided to retire. Benjamin went east for university, studying law, and returned to open the first law practice in Ardmore. The twins were still young, but Daniel showed promise as a horseman and Hope as an artist. Thomas remained a deputy marshal until a bullet in the leg finally convinced him to retire. He took a job as sheriff of Ardmore, a position that kept him in town and safe, much to the relief of his wife and children. He and Vincent remained close friends, often sitting on one porch or another, talking about the old days and watching their children play together. Millicent and her husband had 4 children of their own, and her head for numbers had made their bank the most successful in the territory. Catherine never married, dedicating herself instead to medicine, and when Sarah returned from medical school, the 2 sisters opened a clinic that served the entire region. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Theresa back to the spot where he had proposed, where the wildflowers still bloomed each spring. 10 years, he said, holding her hand as they looked out over the land that had become so familiar. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like you have always been part of my life. I cannot even remember what my life was like before you, Theresa admitted. Before Ardmore, before the ranch, before our children. That girl who stepped off the train looking for her brother seems like a stranger now. She was brave, Vincent said, and strong and determined. You are still all those things, Theresa. You have not changed, just grown. We both have, she said, leaning against his shoulder. I think about those first days sometimes, how scared I was, how uncertain. I had no idea what I was doing, just knew I had to find Thomas. And instead you found me, Vincent said with a smile. Best decision I ever made, offering to help you that day. Best decision I ever made, accepting, Theresa agreed. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, over the life they had built together. In the distance, they could see their house, smoke rising from the chimney, lights beginning to glow in the windows as evening fell. Their children would be inside, probably arguing about something inconsequential, filling the space with life and energy. I love you, Theresa said softly. I loved you almost from the beginning, though I tried not to admit it even to myself. And I love you more now than I thought possible. I love you too, Vincent replied, pulling her closer. You are my heart, Theresa. Everything good in my life traces back to you. He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Theresa thought about all the years that had led to this moment. The desperate search for Thomas, the dangerous journey into the wilderness, the slow building of trust and affection that had turned into deep, abiding love. The wedding, the children, the challenges and triumphs they had faced together. When they returned to the house, the children mobbed them with questions about where they had been and demands to settle various disputes. Vincent laughed and waded into the chaos, arbitrating with the wisdom of long practice. Theresa watched her family, her heart so full it ached. This was what happiness looked like, she realized. Not some grand, dramatic thing, but this. Ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. Children squabbling over toys. A husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon. Sisters who lived close enough to visit regularly. A brother who had survived against all odds and built a good life. That night, after the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, Theresa and Vincent sat on their porch swing, rocking gently, hands intertwined. "Tell me again," she said, as she sometimes did. "Tell me about the day we met." Vincent smiled, knowing what she wanted to hear. "I saw you standing at that train station, looking lost and determined all at once, and something in my chest just knew. This is her, I thought. This is the woman who is going to change everything." "You did not," Theresa protested, though she loved hearing it. "I did," Vincent insisted. "Maybe I did not have the words for it then. Maybe I could not have explained what I felt. But some part of me recognized you, Theresa. Recognized that you were going to be important, that helping you would lead me to exactly where I needed to be." "And where is that?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "Here," he said simply. "With you, with our children, on this land, building this life. Right here is exactly where I am meant to be." Theresa rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the night sounds of the prairie, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through grass. This land that had once seemed so foreign and frightening now felt like home in the deepest sense of the word. "I never thought I would end up here," she mused. "When I left Missouri, I thought we would find Thomas and go back, resume our old lives. It never occurred to me that we would build new ones." "Are you glad you stayed?" Vincent asked, though he knew that answer too. "Gladder than I can say," Theresa replied. "This place, this life, you, our children, it is more than I ever dreamed of having. Coming to Ardmore was supposed to be a rescue mission. Instead, it was the beginning of everything." They sat in silence for a while longer, then Vincent spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we had not found Thomas? If Morrow had lied, or if the Cherokee had not taken him in, or if we had been just a day too late?" "I try not to," Theresa admitted. "It frightens me to think how close we came to losing him. But I also think that you would have helped us search for as long as it took, and I would have stayed in Ardmore regardless, because by that point I was already in love with you." "Truly," Vincent turned to look at her. "Even then." "Even then," she confirmed. "I kept telling myself it was just gratitude or admiration or the intensity of our situation. But deep down, I knew. I knew that what I felt for you was real and lasting. I knew that even if we never found Thomas, I would not regret the journey because it led me to you." Vincent pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I am a lucky man, Theresa Sawyer." "We are both lucky," she corrected. "Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have our family, lucky to have survived all the dangers and challenges to get here." As they sat together in the darkness, Theresa thought about all the women she might have been. The teacher in Missouri who never married, dedicating herself to other people's children. The grieving sister who lost her brother and never recovered from the pain. The cautious woman who turned down Vincent's courtship out of fear or propriety, but she was none of those women. She was Theresa Sawyer, wife and mother, teacher and rancher's partner, sister and friend. She was a woman who had faced danger and uncertainty and come through stronger for it. She was beloved and loving, challenged and satisfied, exactly who she was meant to be. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and constancy in equal measure. Indian Territory became the state of Oklahoma in 1907, and Ardmore grew from a rough frontier town into a proper city. The school Theresa had founded expanded into a full academy. Vincent's ranch became one of the largest in the region, though he never let success make him arrogant or cruel. Their children grew and married and had children of their own. Samuel took over the ranch, expanding it further while maintaining his father's commitment to fair dealing and ethical practices. Grace married a fellow teacher and continued running the school. Benjamin's law practice flourished, and he eventually became a judge. Daniel became a veterinarian, the first in the region, and Hope married an artist from back east and split her time between Oklahoma and New York, painting scenes of the West that became quite famous. Thomas lived to see his stepchildren grown and his grandchildren born. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68, surrounded by family, his hand held by the wife who had loved him for more than 30 years. At his funeral, Vincent gave a eulogy that had everyone in tears, talking about the friend who had welcomed him to Ardmore and the brother who had given him the greatest gift of his life by having such an extraordinary sister. Millicent and Catherine both lived long lives, pillars of the community, beloved by all who knew them. Sarah's medical practice saved countless lives, and she never regretted her decision to return to Ardmore and serve the people who needed her. Vincent and Theresa grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at the ranch, now run by Samuel but still feeling like home, and people came from all over the state to honor the couple who had become legends in their own right. 50 years, Vincent said, standing with some difficulty, his hair now completely white, his face deeply lined but still handsome. 50 years with the most remarkable woman I have ever known. I was a lonely cowboy before I met Theresa, just going through the motions of life. She taught me what it meant to truly live, to love, to build something that matters. Every good thing in my life traces back to the day I saw her standing at that train station, looking for her brother. Theresa wiped tears from her eyes as their family applauded. She stood, and Vincent took her hand, helping her to her feet with the same gentleness he had always shown. "I was looking for my brother," she said, her voice still strong despite her years. "But I found so much more. I found love and home and purpose. I found a partner who treated me as an equal, who supported my dreams, who gave me a family more wonderful than I could have imagined. People sometimes ask me if I have regrets, and I tell them the only thing I regret is not having more years ahead of us. 50 is not enough. 100 would not be enough. I would spend 1,000 years with this man if I could." They kissed, prompting cheers and applause from the gathered crowd. And as Theresa looked around at all the faces, all the lives that had stemmed from that desperate search so many decades ago, she felt profound gratitude. Thomas had been found. Vincent had helped them search, and she had married him, building a life beyond her wildest dreams. It was a story she never tired of telling, especially to her grandchildren who loved to hear about the adventure that had brought their grandparents together. Vincent lived to be 76, still sharp-minded and loving until the very end. He died with Theresa holding his hand. Their children gathered around, and his last words were, "I love you," whispered to the woman who had been his everything for more than 5 decades. Theresa lived another 3 years after Vincent's death. Years she spent with her family, at the school that still bore her name, and at the ranch that she and Vincent had built together. She spent her final days in the house where she had raised her children, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories about their grandfather and the wild territory they had helped tame. When she died peacefully in her sleep at 79, the whole state mourned. The funeral was attended by hundreds, including the governor, and the eulogy was given by her granddaughter, a teacher at the academy Theresa had founded. "My grandmother used to say that sometimes you go looking for one thing and find something completely different," the young woman said. She went looking for her brother and found the love of her life. She came to a rough frontier town expecting to leave and instead built a home. She thought she was rescuing Thomas, but in many ways, this place and this man rescued her. She lived a life of purpose and love, and she left the world better than she found it. That is the legacy she left us all. Theresa was buried beside Vincent on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, "Together in life, together in death, together forever." And on that stone, someone had added wildflowers, the same kind that bloomed each spring in the spot where Vincent had proposed so many years ago. The story of the 4 sisters who came seeking their brother, and the cowboy who helped them search and married the eldest, became part of Ardmore's history. It was told and retold, embellished and romanticized, until it took on the quality of legend. But for those who had lived it, for the children and grandchildren who carried the legacy forward, it was simply the truth. A story of love and courage, of family and faith, of 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful that lasted generations. The ranch still stands, now run by great-grandchildren who maintain Vincent's commitment to the land and the animals. The school still educates children, with Theresa's portrait hanging in the main hall. The town of Ardmore, Oklahoma, grew and changed, but it never forgot the Wilson sisters and the cowboy who helped them, the love story that began with a desperate search and ended with a legacy that would endure forever. And sometimes, on spring evenings when the wildflowers bloom and the wind whispers across the prairie, people swear they can see 2 figures walking hand in hand across the land, still together, still in love, watching over the family and the home they built together so long ago.